All right, let's dive into this explainer by acknowledging a pretty massive paradox we all kind of live with today. Think about your life right now for a second. We are constantly, overwhelmingly drowning in modern stimulation. We literally have more entertainment at our fingertips right this second than any royal monarch had in all of human history. And yet, somehow, we still end up feeling utterly uninspired. We still find ourselves staring blankly at a wall, feeling that familiar, super uncomfortable itch of having absolutely nothing to do. 47. Think about that number. That is the average number of apps a person has installed on their smartphone right now. You have 47 distinct gateways to endless streaming options, thousands of podcasts, bottomless social feeds, games, you name it. And yet somehow boredom always creeps back in, doesn't it? You can consume all the content in the world, but your brain still hits a wall. So why is that? Why is boredom so inescapable? Well, to understand that, we actually have to go backward, like way, way backward. Which brings us to the ultimate historical mystery. What did ancient humans actually do when they were bored? And I'm not talking about medieval times or, the ancient Egyptians. I mean 100,000 or even 200,000 years ago, before writing, before art, before language as we currently understand it even existed. Just humans sitting there with absolutely zero entertainment. How in the world did they survive the sheer monotony of existence? This brilliantly illustrates a massive paradigm shift introduced by the anthropologist Marshall Sullins. See, for decades, the standard scientific assumption was that our earliest ancestors simply didn't have the time to get bored. We just assumed 100% of their waking hours were spent frantically hunting, gathering, and, trying not to be eaten. But in 1966, Sullins published this groundbreaking study on the Kung people of the Kalahari Desert, whose lifestyle was very similar to early humans. The reality? They only worked about 15 to 20 hours a week. And that's not per day, guys, that is per week. Sullins actually coined this beautiful term for this. He called them the original affluent society. He completely shattered that endless survival myth by proving that our earliest ancestors actually possessed massive amounts of downtime. They weren't wealthy in possessions, but they were incredibly wealthy in time. They had way more free time than most modern humans ever get, which really begs a fascinating question. If they weren't fighting for survival all day long, what exactly happened when they got bored? Let's look at Pillar 1, creation and the artifacts of play. Well, when you have massive amounts of free time on your hands, you're eventually forced to physically manipulate the world around you just to give your hands and your mind something to do. Let me give you a stunning example. Back in 2010, archaeologist Francesco De Rico and his team were studying a collection of shells found at Blombos Cave down in South Africa. These shells are 75,000 years old. They had deliberate holes drilled straight through them and were coated in red ochre. They weren't weapons, they weren't tools for getting food, they were beads. Somebody, 75,000 years ago, sat down with a piece of stone and did the painstaking hours-long work of drilling through shells just to make jewelry. Why? Simply because the alternative was literally staring at a cave wall for another 6 hours. And, we see this exact same phenomenon happen with music. During an excavation in 2008 in a cave in southern Germany, researchers found a flute carved right out of a vulture bone, complete with 5 perfectly placed finger holes. It dates back 40,000 years. Someone had a totally free afternoon, a bird bone, and absolutely nothing else to do. In fact, neuroscientist Daniel Levitin argues that this human urge to create musical rhythm and engage in pattern recognition actually predates complex language. Our brains literally sought out the stimulation of rhythm purely to entertain themselves. So when you lay all this out across the prehistoric timeline, you start to see something incredible. From the earliest humans, around 200,000 years ago, jumping to the Blombos Cave beads, to that vulture bone flute, these massive defining leaps in human culture were not born out of some desperate struggle for survival. They were born from empty afternoons. I really want you to absorb this profound realization. Necessity is the mother of invention. When it comes to tools and shelter, absolutely no doubt about it. But necessity didn't invent art. Boredom did. The foundational elements of our creative culture, the very things that make us distinctively human, were born out of a desperate need to kill time. Moving right along to Pillar 2, cognition and the birth of imagination, the quiet, uncomfortable agony of having absolutely nothing to do didn't just give us beads and bone flutes. It fundamentally rewired our cognition. Think about the actual mechanics of being bored for a second. A dog waiting for its owner isn't truly bored, it's just waiting. But an ancient human sitting around a fire goes through this incredibly complex cognitive process. Step 1, you realize that this current moment is lasting way too long. Step 2, you realize that the future exists and imagine that it could somehow be better or different than right now. And step 3, your wandering mind starts asking, what if? What if the hunt goes wrong? What is beyond that mountain range over there? Where do we go when we die? Those bored, wandering thoughts around a fire eventually became the very foundations of philosophy, religion, and science. And get this, we actually have modern psychological proof of this mechanism. In 2013, psychologist Sandy Mann conducted this completely fascinating study. She had participants do the most mind-numbing task possible, copying numbers straight out of a physical phone book. Afterward, she tested their creativity against a control group. The result? The extremely bored group dramatically outperformed everyone else in innovation and creative problem-solving. The conclusion here is stark. When you starve the brain of external input, it doesn't just shut down. It becomes extraordinarily innovative and starts generating its own internal stimulation. Which brings us to Pillar 3, connection and human society. Early humans didn't just sit in isolation, making beads and pondering the afterlife when they were bored. They were in groups. And when groups of humans have endless free time, they connect. More specifically, they talk. Anthropologist Robin Dunbar spent years studying what humans actually talk about when they aren't discussing logistics or survival. And he made a hilarious but deeply true finding. Roughly 65% of all human conversation is just social gossip. Who did what, who said what to whom, and what the deal is with that person you both know. We love to think of early language as this noble, elevated tool for coordinating mammoth hunts, but honestly, the vast majority of our speech has always just been gossip. Dunbar proposed a brilliant theory for why this happened. Before language, our primate ancestors bonded through physical grooming, literally picking bugs out of each other's hair. But grooming is a one-to-one activity. It takes a massive amount of time. Language and gossip emerged as an evolutionary hack. It allowed one-to-many bonding. Suddenly, sitting around a fire with nothing to do, you could bond with 10 people all at once, just by telling a really good story. This connects the dots in a mind-blowing way. Sitting around doing nothing allowed humans to talk about absent individuals. And that allowed us to build complex webs of reputation and trust with people we weren't physically touching. By killing time together, we scaled our social networks. Gossip, born straight out of boredom, effectively created human society and civilization as we know it. Let's jump to today, the modern era of cognitive overload. Which brings our narrative directly back to you and me, lying awake at 2 a.m., mindlessly scrolling on our phones. We're currently living in an era of pure cognitive overload. Every single moment of our modern lives is overstimulated. We spent 300,000 years evolving to fill the silence of the world with meaningful thought, art, and deep connection. Then we invented smartphones, and we basically entirely erased silence from our lives. By constantly feeding our brains external input, we are preventing them from having those quiet, unstimulated moments required to process information, consolidate memories, and actually create something new. Neurologically speaking, we are actively suppressing what's known as our default mode network. This is a specific network in your brain that literally only activates when you are doing nothing in particular. It is the core engine responsible for your creativity, your deepest self-reflection, and your empathy. Every single time you resist the urge to pull out your phone in a waiting room and just sit with your own thoughts, you are firing up the exact same brain network that painted the first caves and looked up at the stars to invent constellations. So I want to leave you with this provocative challenge to wrap up today's explainer. Boredom didn't hold ancient humans back. It is the very catalyst that made us uniquely human. It forced us to create, to imagine, and to connect. So ask yourself, what might you invent? What profound truth might you discover about yourself? Or what wild realization might you have if you just put your phone down, sat in the silence, and finally allowed yourself to be bored?